What if I told you that some of the most astonishing technological breakthroughs of the medieval world weren't just products of human ingenuity, but were believed to be gifts from the divine? Picture this: master builders raising cathedrals so high they seemed to scrape the heavens, convinced angels guided their hands, artisans crafting intricate clockwork mechanisms, certain that each gear turned in harmony with the celestial spheres. This was a time when the line between science and the sacred didn't just blur, it vanished altogether. Welcome to a world where faith didn't just inspire art or music, it engineered marvels that defied the limits of human imagination. Think about the last time you stood in awe of an ancient structure or a delicate, centuries-old mechanism. Chances are you were witnessing more than just clever engineering. You were seeing the echoes of a belief system that saw the invisible woven into every material creation. Medieval innovators didn't separate the spiritual from the mechanical. For them, every invention was a dialogue with the divine. Water wheels turned by the will of saints, windmills powered by the breath of God, and astronomical instruments designed to map the mind of the cosmos itself. These weren't just tools, they were prayers made tangible, bridges between earth and eternity. So how did this fusion of faith and technology shape the medieval world? And why does it still matter to us today? Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover the hidden stories behind these extraordinary creations. We'll decipher manuscripts where alchemy meets engineering, explore inventions born from visions and revelations, and meet the brilliant minds who saw no conflict between devotion and discovery. This isn't just a tale of historical curiosity, it's a reminder that human progress has always been driven by something deeper than pure logic. It's about the moments when wonder sparked innovation and belief built the impossible. Ready to step into a world where the invisible shaped the visible? Let's begin. To understand the medieval mind is to step into a world where every stone laid, every gear crafted, every line drawn was part of a grander conversation with the divine. Picture a master mason kneeling in the half-light of dawn, tracing geometric patterns in the dust, not just as blueprints for a cathedral's arches, but as sacred echoes of the harmony he believed governed the universe. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a profound conviction that the laws of nature were divine laws, and to build or invent was to participate in something holy. Take the design of Gothic cathedrals, soaring structures that seem to defy gravity. Their ribbed vaults and flying buttresses weren't just engineering feats, they were deliberate attempts to mirror the heavens, to create earthly vessels for celestial light. The architects of Chartres or Notre Dame didn't just calculate load-bearing weights, they infused their work with numerical symbolism, believing ratios like the golden spiral reflected God's own handiwork. Then there were the alchemists, those enigmatic figures who stirred cauldrons not just to turn lead into gold, but to uncover the spiritual essence hidden within matter itself. Their laboratories were temples where chemistry and prayer intertwined. When they distilled elixirs or studied the properties of metals, they weren't just early scientists, they were seekers of a divine truth they believed was encoded in the very fabric of creation. The famous Voynich manuscript, with its cryptic illustrations of plants and stars, isn't just a puzzle for modern codebreakers. It's a window into a mindset that saw no separation between studying nature and deciphering God's will. Even the simplest tools carried this spiritual weight. Consider the watermill, a technology we might see as purely practical. To medieval eyes, its turning wheel was a microcosm of cosmic order. The same forces that moved the planets were harnessed to grind grain, a daily reminder of divine providence at work. Clockmakers, too, crafted their intricate mechanisms not just to mark hours, but to model the perfection of celestial motion, believing their gears mirrored the dance of the spheres. This fusion of faith and innovation didn't just shape individual inventions, it fueled an entire culture of curiosity. Monastic scriptoria, where monks painstakingly copied ancient texts, became hubs of technological preservation and experimentation. The Benedictine rule, with its emphasis on manual labor, turned monasteries into workshops where spiritual discipline and mechanical ingenuity flourished side by side. It's no accident that some of the period's most advanced devices, astrolabes, mechanical clocks, even early windmills, emerged from communities where work was itself a form of worship. What's perhaps most striking is how this world turned limitations into creative sparks. Faced with the unknown, medieval thinkers didn't see barriers, they saw mysteries to be reverently unraveled. When a builder lacked modern engineering tools, he relied on sacred geometry. When a healer didn't understand a disease, he turned to herbal lore infused with spiritual significance. This wasn't ignorance, it was a different kind of wisdom, one that reminds us how deeply belief can shape what we dare to imagine and what we're driven to build. The moment you step inside a Gothic cathedral, you're enveloped by something far greater than stone and glass. You're standing inside a carefully orchestrated symphony of light, sound, and sacred geometry. Take the rose window, that breathtaking wheel of stained glass flooding the nave with jewel-toned light. To the medieval mind, this wasn't just decoration, it was theology in color. The circular form echoed the perfection of God's creation, while the intricate tracery mapped the order of the cosmos. Sunlight streaming through reds and blues transformed the very air into a luminous hymn, turning worshippers into participants in a divine light show. And the architects knew exactly what they were doing. They angled windows to catch the sun at specific hours, so at certain times of day, the entire choir would glow as if touched by celestial fire. But it wasn't just about sight. Close your eyes in a cathedral like Chartres, and you'll notice something remarkable: the way sound behaves. Those soaring vaults weren't just lifting eyes heavenward, they were shaping acoustics to carry chants upward like smoke from an altar. The reverberation time, how long a note hangs in the air, wasn't accidental. Builders adjusted the curves of arches and the placement of pillars to create a resonance that made plainchant feel unearthly, as if the stones themselves were singing. Even the labyrinth patterns inlaid in some cathedral floors served a purpose beyond decoration. Walking these winding paths was a form of meditation, a physical pilgrimage compressed into sacred geometry. Then there's the engineering itself, those flying buttresses that seem to defy gravity. Modern engineers might analyze them as clever load-distributing supports, but medieval builders saw them as stone wings lifting the church toward God. The ribbed vaults overhead weren't just structural. Their intersecting arches mirrored the crossing paths of heaven and earth. Even the cathedral's orientation mattered. Each one was carefully aligned so the rising sun on the feast day of its patron saint would illuminate the high altar at dawn, a yearly miracle of light and timing. Perhaps most telling is how these cathedrals grew over generations. A master mason might spend his entire life working on a single tower, knowing he'd never see it finished. That slow, collective effort, each craftsman contributing to something greater than himself, was the medieval world in microcosm. The cathedral wasn't just a building project, it was an act of devotion spanning centuries, where every chisel mark was a prayer set in stone. And when you look up at those spires piercing the sky, remember, they weren't just showing medieval people where heaven was, they were showing them how to reach it. Among the most haunting and fascinating relics of this era is the mechanical monk, a small clockwork figure crafted in the 16th century, now sitting quietly in the Smithsonian. At first glance, it might seem like a mere curiosity, a clever toy from a bygone age, But this automaton wasn't built for entertainment. Its purpose was prayer. With a slow, deliberate motion, its wooden hand would rise, clutching a rosary while its head bowed in reverence. Its gears turned not just by springs and weights, but by a deeper conviction that even machines could participate in devotion. This wasn't an isolated marvel. Across medieval Europe, automata populated cathedrals and courts, mechanical angels that sang, golden birds that fluttered, even statues that wept miraculous tears. But the monk stands apart because it wasn't meant to astonish, it was meant to intercede. Commissioned by King Philip II of Spain as a tribute to a healing miracle, it embodied a profound belief that human ingenuity, when aligned with divine will, could breathe a kind of sacred life into the inanimate. What's truly remarkable is how these devices forced medieval thinkers to grapple with questions we still wrestle with today. If a machine could mimic prayer, did that prayer count? Could a creation of gears and levers channel grace? Theologians debated whether automata were vessels for the divine or merely reflections of human skill. In many ways, these discussions foreshadowed our modern dilemmas about artificial intelligence. When we ask whether AI can be creative or conscious, we're echoing those 16th-century monks puzzling over their clockwork companion. The deeper you look, the more the mechanical monk reveals about medieval spirituality. Its design wasn't arbitrary, every detail carried meaning. The monk's slow, rhythmic movements mirrored the disciplined pace of monastic life, a reminder that even machines could model piety. Its unceasing motion symbolized eternal devotion, something no human could sustain, and perhaps most strikingly, its very existence suggested that humans weren't just passive subjects of God's will, they were collaborators, using their God-given intellect to extend the boundaries of the sacred into the mechanical. This idea of humans as co-creators with the divine might be the most enduring legacy of these early automata. Long before the word robot existed, medieval artisans were already probing the limits of artificial life, not to replace humanity, but to glorify its connection to something greater. So the next time you hear debates about whether AI can ever truly think, remember the mechanical monk still kneeling in its museum case, silently asking us where the line between invention and inspiration really lies. Astrolabes weren't just tools for navigation or timekeeping. They were medieval Europe's most sophisticated attempt to hold the cosmos in their hands. Picture a scholar in a candlelit scriptorium, turning the delicate brass discs of an astrolabe, each rotation aligning not just with stars, but with a deeper belief that the universe itself was a grand musical composition. To medieval thinkers, the planets didn't just move, they sang. The so-called music of the spheres was no poetic metaphor, it was a sacred truth, a harmonic resonance woven into creation by divine hands. And the astrolabe, it was humanity's best instrument for eavesdropping on that celestial choir. The design of these devices reveals just how deeply this idea took root. Look closely at the rete, the intricate star-pierced disc at an astrolabe's heart. Its patterns weren't random, they mirrored the mathematical ratios medieval musicians used to tune their instruments. The spacing between star pointers echoed the intervals of a perfect fifth or octave, as if the heavens were a vast lyre waiting to be played. Even the astrolabe's rotating plates mimicked the layered harmonies of polyphonic music, with each disc representing a different voice in the cosmic chorus. This wasn't mere symbolism. Medieval astronomers like Johannes de Sacrobosco wrote treatises comparing planetary orbits to musical scales, calculating celestial distances in intervals that would please the ear. When a scholar held an astrolabe aloft to measure a star's position, they weren't just collecting data, they were checking if the universe was still in tune. The device's precision mattered because they believed any deviation might signal discord in the divine symphony, a cosmic warning of upheaval or sin. The Astrolabes' connection to music went even deeper. Many surviving instruments include scales for calculating the timing of prayers, not just by the sun's position, but by its movement through zodiacal houses, each associated with specific musical mode. Imagine a monk in 12th century Toledo using his astrolabe to determine when to chant Vespers, convinced that singing at the exact moment Mars entered a particular harmonic alignment would make his prayers resonate through the fabric of creation. What's most striking is how this fusion of science and spirituality fueled innovation. The same monasteries preserving Gregorian chants became workshops where craftsmen refined astrolabes, each advancement driven by the conviction that better instruments meant clearer glimpses of God's grand design. When Persian polymath al-Biruni described the astrolabe as the mathematical jewel, he wasn't exaggerating. It was a devotional object as much as a scientific one, a bridge between earthly intellect and heavenly harmony. Today, we might smile at the idea of planets singing, but the legacy of this thinking is everywhere. Modern astrophysics still speaks of orbital resonances and gravitational waves, reminders that the universe really does vibrate with hidden music. And when we see an astrolabe in a museum, we're not just looking at an old calculator, we're seeing a key to a lost worldview, one where every equation was a hymn and every star chart a sheet of sacred music waiting to be heard. Alchemy's laboratories were far more than primitive chemistry sets. They were sacred workshops where every flame, every distillation, every carefully measured ingredient carried cosmic significance. Imagine an alchemist at dawn, stirring a crucible not just with metal rods, but with prayers, believing the purity of his intentions could influence the transformation unfolding before him. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a disciplined fusion of technique and theology. The famed emerald tablets maxim, "As above, so below," wasn't poetic metaphor to these practitioners, it was an operating manual. They saw the process of refining metals as a mirror for refining the soul, where base impurities weren't just chemical flaws but symbols of human frailty waiting to be purified into spiritual gold. Take the quest for the Philosopher's Stone, that legendary substance said to transmute metals and grant immortality. Modern eyes might dismiss it as fantasy, but to alchemists, the stone represented something far grander, the pinnacle of both material and spiritual mastery. Texts like the Rosarium Philosophorum describe its creation not just through physical steps, but through stages of meditation, moral purification, and even visions. An alchemist might spend years perfecting the nigredo stage, the blackening of matter, not merely as a chemical process but as a symbolic death of the ego, a necessary darkness before enlightenment. When they spoke of solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine, they meant breaking down not just substances, but the very illusions separating the self from the divine. These laboratories were also hubs of surprisingly advanced technology. Alchemists developed intricate furnaces that could maintain precise temperatures for weeks, glassware for delicate distillations, and even early forms of water baths and filtration systems. But what's fascinating is how they documented their work. Their manuscripts are filled with intricate diagrams where chemical apparatuses intertwine with zodiacal symbols, showing a worldview where planetary alignments were as crucial to an experiment as heat levels. A recipe might instruct the alchemist to begin a distillation when the moon is in Taurus, not out of blind tradition, but because they genuinely believed celestial forces influenced molecular interactions. The legacy of this spiritual science lingers in ways we seldom notice. The alchemical symbol for copper, a mirror with a handle, survives today in astronomy as the sign for Venus. Their meticulous record-keeping laid groundwork for modern lab notebooks, and their insistence on reproducible results, though framed in spiritual terms, helped seed the scientific method. Even the word elixir, now a casual term for tonics, once denoted a sacred substance believed to balance bodily humors and cosmic energies alike. Perhaps most enduring is the alchemical mindset itself, the idea that transformation, whether of matter or spirit, follows universal patterns. Psychologist Carl Jung would later recognize alchemy's symbols as archetypes of human psychology, proof that these medieval seekers were mapping inner landscapes as much as outer ones. So the next time you see an old engraving of a dragon eating its own tail, the Ouroboros, alchemy's symbol of eternal cycles, remember, it's not just a quaint relic. It's a reminder that every age has its own way of seeking wholeness, and that the line between science and the sacred has always been thinner than we think. The steady drip of water into a copper basin might seem like a simple way to mark time, but in medieval monasteries, this rhythmic pulse was nothing short of sacred. Water clocks or clepsydry weren't just practical tools, they were cosmic conductors, ensuring every hymn, every prayer, every moment of silence unfolded in perfect harmony with the heavens. Picture a Benedictine monk adjusting the flow of water through his clock's narrow channel, not just to track hours, but to align his community's devotions with the movements of planets and stars. To him, time wasn't an abstract concept, it was a divine current, and his clock was a vessel sailing its celestial tide. What made these devices extraordinary was their precision. Unlike sundials, which fell silent under clouds or moonlight, water clocks pulsed with unbroken regularity, their measured drips mirroring the eternal constancy medieval thinkers attributed to God's order. Some monastery clocks even featured elaborate systems of floats and gears that triggered bells at designated hours, turning timekeeping into a kind of mechanical liturgy. The clock at the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, for example, didn't just chime, it orchestrated an entire monastic day, from the pre-dawn vigils to the evening compline, ensuring no prayer was ever out of step with the cosmic dance. But the true marvel lies in how these clocks reflected a world where science and spirituality were inseparable. Medieval horologists didn't just calculate time, they sanctified it. The clock's circular reservoir might represent the eternity of God, while its flowing water symbolized life's transient nature. Even the act of maintaining the device, cleaning its channels, adjusting its flow became a meditative practice, a reminder that tending to time was akin to tending to the soul. This spiritual approach to timekeeping had surprising consequences. The need for accurate prayer schedules drove innovations like segmented tanks to account for seasonal changes in daylight, or counterweight systems that prefigured later mechanical clocks. When the great abbey clocks struck the hour, they didn't just call monks to prayer, they announced humanity's growing ability to quantify divine order. And when mechanical clocks eventually replaced water clocks, they inherited this sacred purpose. The word clock itself comes from the Latin clocca, meaning bell, a nod to how these devices first served ecclesiastical time. Perhaps the most poignant legacy of these water clocks is how they embody a lost relationship with time. In an age where our digital devices fracture attention into milliseconds, the monastic water clock invites us to remember when time wasn't something to conquer or compress, but to commune with a rhythm as natural as breath, as sacred as prayer. The next time you check your watch, consider this. 8 centuries ago, someone turned the act of measuring moments into an act of devotion, proving that even something as mundane as telling time can become a bridge between earth and eternity. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks reveal a truth that often gets lost in modern retellings. His genius wasn't just about human intellect, it was a relentless search for divine patterns hidden in the fabric of creation. Take his famous aerial screw, a helical design many consider the ancestor of the helicopter. While we might see it as an early attempt at flight, Leonardo described it in terms that echoed medieval angelology, a machine that could mimic the spiraling ascent of celestial beings. His sketches of wings weren't just engineering studies, they were painstaking attempts to reverse engineer what he believed were God's own designs for aerial motion. Even his meticulous studies of bird flight carried a spiritual undercurrent, with notes comparing their movements to the music of the spheres, that harmonic dance medieval thinkers attributed to the heavens. Then there's his obsession with the Vitruvian Man, that iconic drawing of a figure perfectly inscribed within a circle and square. Modern audiences often interpret it as a triumph of Renaissance humanism, but Leonardo's own writings tell a different story. He saw those geometric harmonies as proof of divine craftsmanship, the human body as a microcosm of cosmic order. His anatomical dissections, far from being purely scientific, were almost reverential. He described the heart's valves as gates and the bronchial branches of lungs as the tree of life, language steeped in spiritual symbolism. When he sketched the layers of an onion to understand its proportional growth, he wasn't just studying botany, he was decoding what he called the geometry of the creator. What's most striking is how this mindset fueled his innovations. His designs for parabolic mirrors to concentrate sunlight, inspired by medieval theories of burning glasses that could harness the divine fire of the heavens. His studies of water vortices, framed as explorations of the soul of the world, a concept borrowed from Neoplatonic philosophy. Even his war machines, often cited as evidence of his secular pragmatism, included designs for a scythed chariot he described as an instrument of divine judgment, echoing biblical imagery of apocalyptic horsemen. This fusion of piety and invention wasn't unique to Leonardo. His contemporary, the mathematician Luca Pacioli, wrote treatises connecting sacred geometry to art and architecture, collaborating with Leonardo on studies of polyhedrons they believed held cosmic secrets. The famed Salvator Mundi painting, attributed to Leonardo, depicts Christ holding a crystal orb, not just a religious symbol, but a nod to the era's fascination with optics and the idea that light itself was a manifestation of divine truth. The lesson here isn't that Leonardo's faith diminished his scientific achievement, it's that his spiritual convictions actively shaped them. In an age before rigid boundaries between science and religion, his belief in a universe woven with sacred patterns drove him to look deeper, to see connections others missed. Those fantastical flying machines and ideal proportions weren't flights of fancy. They were acts of devotion, attempts to touch the mind of the maker through the language of mechanics and mathematics. And perhaps that's why his work still captivates us centuries later, not just because of what he designed, but because he saw the universe as a puzzle worth solving, a masterpiece worth studying, a revelation waiting to be unfurled. The medieval world's so-called books of secrets might look like chaotic jumbles to modern eyes, pages where instructions for forging steel sit beside invocations to archangels, where diagrams of siege engines share parchment with zodiacal charms. But open one with the right mindset, and you'll discover something extraordinary. These weren't random collections of superstition and science. They were sacred encyclopedias, treating the act of creating a new pigment or tuning a lute string with the same reverence as reciting a prayer. Consider the Schedula Diversarum Artium, a 12th century manual by the monk Theophilus. His guide to crafting stained glass doesn't just list technical steps, it frames each stage as a spiritual exercise, from purifying silver with prayers to timing furnace firings with planetary alignments. To Theophilus, mastering these arts wasn't just skill, it was participation in divine creativity. What's revelatory is how these texts preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. When alchemists encrypted recipes for acids or alloys within allegorical poems about dragons and roses, they weren't being deliberately obscure, they were protecting sacred knowledge from misuse. The famous Mappi Clavicula, a 9th century compilation, hides instructions for making verdigris pigment behind layers of symbolic language, ensuring only those properly initiated could unlock its secrets. This wasn't paranoia, it was a recognition that technology, like spirituality, required ethical preparation. The same manuscript that teaches how to gild metal might warn that arrogance in craftsmanship could invite demonic interference. A medieval way of saying knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. Modern historians once dismissed these books as primitive, but contemporary restorers have made startling discoveries. When craftsmen at Chartres Cathedral followed Theophilus's exact instructions, including his ritual timing and prayerful gestures, they produced glass with a luminosity modern methods can't replicate. Scientists analyzing medieval steel recipes encrypted in Books of Secrets found microscopic carbon structures rivaling today's aerospace alloys. It turns out those magical incantations often encoded precise technical details. A chant for tempering swords might rhythmically remind the smith when to quench the blade, turning poetry into a mnemonic for metallurgy. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in how these manuscripts viewed failure. Where modern engineering manuals might list troubleshooting steps, medieval texts often framed mistakes as spiritual imbalances. A cracked bell mold wasn't just a technical flaw, it might signal the caster's pride or haste. This perspective created a culture where mastery required inner growth as much as external skill. The Liber Igneum, a 13th century fire-making manual, insists its recipes for Greek fire will only work if the maker's intentions are pure, an early recognition that ethics shape outcomes. We've gained much by separating science from spirituality, precision, reproducibility, explosive progress. But leafing through these stained and candle-smudged pages, one wonders if we've also lost something vital. The humility that once accompanied discovery, the awe that reminded innovators they were uncovering truths greater than themselves. In an age where technology often feels disembodied and transactional, these old books whisper that knowledge was never meant to be just power, it was meant to be communion. Windmills rose across the medieval countryside like wooden titans, their sails turning not just with the breeze, but with what people saw as the very breath of God. While we might view them as early examples of renewable energy to medieval communities, their creaking timbers spoke a sacred language. Dutch and English millers often inscribed their sails with prayers or crosses, believing the rotation spread blessings over the land. The mill itself became a kind of mechanical altar, its central post called the Post of the World, mirroring the axis mundi that ancient cultures believed connected earth to heaven. This spiritual significance drove astonishing engineering feats. Take the tower mills dotting the Spanish plains, where monks adapted Islamic gear systems to harness the wind more efficiently. Their improved vertical drive shafts and lantern pinions weren't just practical upgrades. They reflected a quest to perfect what one chronicler called God's mill, a celestial counterpart believed to grind the stars themselves into cosmic order. The same monastic workshops preserving scripture also refined mill designs, treating each gear ratio as a numerical hymn to divine harmony. Perhaps no invention better illustrates this blend of faith and function than the fantail, the small secondary sail that automatically turns the mill into the wind. Developed in the 15th century, this seemingly simple device was revolutionary. Earlier millers had to manually realign heavy structures with poles or ropes, losing precious grinding time. But the fantail's inventor, likely an observant craftsman, recognized that the wind's changing direction wasn't chaos, it was a divine signal to adapt. His solution transformed mills from static machines into responsive partners with the elements. The symbolism ran deep. Millstones weren't just tools. Their circular motion echoed medieval depictions of Ezekiel's wheel or the Ouroboros serpent eating its tail, symbols of eternity. When a miller adjusted the gap between stones to produce finer flour, he called it giving more light to the grain, framing a technical act in spiritual terms. Even mill construction became ritualized, with cornerstones laid at astrologically auspicious times and key components anointed with holy oil. What's remarkable is how this worldview accelerated progress. The need to align mill operations with liturgical calendars, ensuring enough flour for feast days, spurred innovations in output and storage. Monasteries developed early assembly line techniques, with one mill grinding while another sifted, to meet sacramental bread demands. These weren't just production boosts, they were acts of devotion scaled to communal need. By the late Middle Ages, windmills had become so central to spiritual life that they appeared in altarpieces and stained glass. The famous Mill of the Host painting by Juan de Flandes shows Christ as a miller, transforming wheat into the Eucharistic bread, a vivid metaphor for how medieval people saw technology participating in grace. When we look at surviving windmills today, we're not just seeing early industry, we're witnessing the quiet persistence of an idea that every turning gear, every caught breeze was part of a conversation between human hands and something infinitely greater. The great astronomical clock in Prague doesn't just tell time, it performs a mechanical miracle every hour. As the bell chimes, a parade of apostles marches past windows, a skeletal figure tolls the hour, and a golden rooster crows. To medieval observers, this wasn't just clever engineering. It was a miniature universe in motion, proof that celestial harmony could be captured in gears and springs. This vision of a clockwork cosmos didn't emerge from cold calculation. It sprang from a profound belief that the universe itself was God's masterpiece, its precision mirroring divine perfection. Long before Isaac Newton described the solar system as a great clock, medieval scholars like Richard of Wallingford were building actual clocks to model it. His 14th century masterpiece at St. Albans Abbey didn't just mark hours, it plotted planetary positions, predicted eclipses, and even accounted for the irregular orbit of the moon. What drove such complexity? A conviction that understanding these mechanisms meant glimpsing the mind of their maker. The clock's intricate gear trains, with their precisely calculated ratios, weren't just technical achievements. They were theological statements, numerical proof that creation followed mathematical laws set by a rational God. This spiritual drive transformed timekeeping technology. When monks developed the Verge escapement, the crucial component that made mechanical clocks possible, they weren't just solving an engineering problem. They were creating a device that ticked in sync with what they believed was the universe's own heartbeat. The quiet rhythmic pulse of early monastic clocks mirrored the orderly progression of medieval liturgy, where canonical hours structured both prayer and labor. Even the word clock shares roots with the Latin cloca, meaning bell, a reminder that these devices first served to call communities to sacred time. Portable clocks, too, carried this cosmic symbolism. The earliest personal timepieces, like the 15th century Burgundy clock owned by Philip the Good, were ornate celestial spheres with moving planets. Worn as pendants, they didn't just tell time, they let nobles carry miniature universes against their hearts, a tangible connection to divine order. Watchmakers soon adopted astrological symbols in their designs, with zodiac rings marking seasonal hours and phases of the moon. To own such a device was to hold a fragment of eternity in your palm. What's astonishing is how this worldview accelerated innovation. The need for precise prayer times pushed monasteries to refine escapement mechanisms. The belief that celestial motions should be reproducible drove clockmakers to invent planetarium displays. Even the concept of equal hours, now standard, emerged from monastic schedules dividing day and night into 12 equal parts, reflecting the perfection of sacred geometry. By the time Newton articulated his clockwork universe, Europe had already spent centuries building it in brass and iron. The legacy of this fusion still ticks within us. Every quartz oscillator in a modern smartphone resonates with that medieval quest to quantify divine harmony. The atomic clocks guiding GPS satellites are distant descendants of Richard of Wallingford's celestial calculator. And when we speak of fine-tuning in cosmology today, we're unconsciously echoing the medieval clockmaker's belief that precision isn't just useful, but holy. The next time you check your watch, remember, you're not just measuring minutes, you're touching the last link in a chain of thought that once saw time itself as God's most perfect machine. Gazing down from the rain-slicked heights of Notre Dame, gargoyles seem to snarl at the modern world below, but these stone sentinels were never meant to be mere decorations. Medieval craftsmen carved them with dual purpose, as spiritual warriors and ingenious hydraulics. Each grotesque figure functioned as a sacred scarecrow, its gaping mouth channeling rainwater away from cathedral walls, while its terrifying visage repelled demons believed to ride the storm winds. The very word gargoyle comes from the French gargouille, meaning throat, a nod to how these creatures literally spoke through rushing water, turning downpours into roaring proclamations of divine protection. What's fascinating is how their designs married symbolism with structural necessity. The elongated necks and gaping jaws weren't just artistic flourishes, they maximized water projection, preventing erosion that could weaken sacred walls. Engineers calculated each creature's angle to optimize drainage, while artisans infused them with apotropaic details, twisted horns to pierce evil, outstretched tongues to lick away impurity, even backward-facing postures symbolizing vigilance against unseen threats. At Chartres Cathedral, one famous gargoyle clutches its head in its hands, not a macabre joke, but a depiction of Saint Nicaise, who legend says carried his own severed head after martyrdom, still preaching as he walked. This fusion of faith and function extended to their placement. Gargoyles cluster at structural weak points, corners where walls meet, junctions where rainwater gathers, as if standing guard over vulnerabilities both physical and spiritual. Some cathedrals even position them to align with sunrise on feast days, casting demonic shadows that would retreat before advancing light. And when Gothic architects developed flying buttresses, they often integrated gargoyles as counterweights, their mass stabilizing the arches while their grimaces warded off the devil's envy of human achievement. The paradox of gargoyles lies in their duality. They're hideous yet holy, functional yet mystical. Modern restorers at places like Washington National Cathedral still employ the medieval gargoyle baptism, anointing new figures with water mixed from ancient holy sites. It's a reminder that these stone guardians were never just gutters. They were the Middle Ages' answer to sacred architecture, where every drop of rain became an exorcism, and every carved demon served as both plumber and priest. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of Chartres Cathedral, a single path unwinds across the stone floor, not in straight lines or practical shortcuts, but in 11 concentric circles that twist and turn back on themselves. This is the Labyrinth, a walkable puzzle that medieval pilgrims called the Road to Jerusalem. But here's the revelation: these intricate designs weren't just metaphors. They were carefully engineered spiritual tools, using geometry and motion to alter consciousness centuries before neuroscience confirmed the mind-body connection. Step onto the path, and you're not just walking, you're entering a sacred machine where every turn is calibrated to quiet the mind and open the soul. The genius of these labyrinths lies in their mathematical precision. At Rheims Cathedral, the path's length mirrors the number of days in a lunar cycle, while Amiens' labyrinth encodes ratios found in Gregorian chant. The most famous at Chartres spans 42 feet, the same measurement as the cathedral's rose window binding earth to heaven through number and form. As pilgrims shuffled along the narrow trail, often on their knees, the repetitive turns induced a trance-like focus, the physical act of navigating switchbacks quieting mental chatter. Modern researchers call this phenomenon kinetic meditation, but medieval builders understood it intuitively. The body's movement could shape the spirit's journey. What's striking is how these designs anticipated contemporary neuroarchitecture, the science of how spaces affect our brains. The labyrinth's continuous path, with no dead ends or choices, eliminates decision fatigue while maintaining engagement. Its fractal-like patterns stimulate alpha brainwaves associated with relaxed alertness, similar to effects measured in Japanese Zen gardens. Even the materials were chosen for their psychological impact. The pale limestone of Chartres' labyrinth reflects diffused light, creating a soft glow that medieval texts describe as the milk of divine wisdom. These weren't solitary experiences. On certain feast days, whole congregations would walk the labyrinth together in synchronized spirals, their collective movement turning the floor into a living mandala. Some cathedral labyrinths even doubled as liturgical dance floors, where priests would perform Easter rituals tracing the path's turns, a practice echoing ancient maze dances symbolizing death and rebirth. The labyrinth at Auxerre still bears marks from these sacred performances, grooves worn smooth by centuries of circling feet. Today, we might dismiss such practices as quaint piety. But consider this: hospitals from Chartres to California now install labyrinths for stress reduction, and NASA engineers study their patterns for optimizing spacecraft navigation. The medieval builders who laid these stones knew nothing of neurons or fractals, yet they crafted a technology of transcendence so potent it still speaks across 8 centuries. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies not in the labyrinth's twists, but in its underlying truth. Sometimes the most advanced technology isn't about moving forward, but about finding your way inward. Villard de Honnecourt's sketchbook reads like a medieval mind laid bare, one where compass lines intersect with heavenly visions, and the curve of a cathedral's ribbed vault shares parchment space with the wings of seraphim. Flip through its yellowed pages and you'll find something astonishing. Meticulous diagrams for lifting machines and siege engines sketched alongside Christ in majesty, all rendered with the same reverent precision. This wasn't just an architect's notebook, it was a devotional object, a testament to the belief that engineering and divinity sprang from the same sacred source. Take his famous drawing of the ideal church plan, a geometric marvel where circles and squares interlock like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. Modern architects might analyze it for its proportional harmonies, but Villard saw deeper. In his notes, he calls these shapes the alphabet of God's hand, believing the same ratios that structured the universe should shape human dwellings. His sketch of a perfect arch isn't just a structural solution, it's annotated with a prayer for stability, as if the stones themselves needed divine reinforcement. Even his doodles of working tools, carpenter's squares, mallets, plumb lines, are drawn with a reverence usually reserved for religious icons, each one labeled not just by function but with moral admonitions. Measure twice, cut once, and let your heart be as straight as this rule. What makes Villard's work truly revolutionary is how he documented failure alongside triumph. One page shows a collapsed tower with the humble note, "This was my error, but through God's grace I saw the truth." Beside it, a corrected design incorporates flying buttresses, their angles calculated not just for load bearing but to echo the slant of sunlight during Pentecost. This wasn't superstition, it was a sophisticated worldview where physics and faith collaborated. When he sketched a water-powered sawmill, he didn't just detail its gear ratios, he drew an angel turning the mill's crank, a visual hymn to the idea that human invention channeled higher forces. The sketchbook's most haunting pages reveal how Villard blended observation with revelation. His studies of living creatures, a lion, a grasshopper, a curled-up sleeping man, aren't mere anatomical exercises. Their investigations into what he called the Creator's blueprints, attempts to reverse engineer divine artistry. A drawing of a bear's paw becomes a lesson in joint construction, its claws annotated with notes on masonry supports. Even his famous mechanical angel, a figure with gears in its wings, wasn't fantasy. It was a working prototype for automata that would later adorn cathedral clocks, proving that to Villard, the miraculous and the mechanical were inseparable. Centuries later, architects still pore over these pages not just for historical insight, but for something more elusive. When Santiago Calatrava designed the twisting towers of Valencia's City of Arts and Sciences, he cited Villard's sketches of spiral staircases as inspiration. Norman Foster's glass and steel cathedrals echo the same light-chasing principles found in the Notebook's church diagrams. What these modern builders recognize is that Villard wasn't just recording techniques. He was mapping a philosophy where every line drawn was an act of devotion. Every structure built a testament to the belief that beauty and function were two faces of the same eternal truth. Perhaps the sketchbook's greatest lesson lies in a humble marginal note beside a drawing of the Strasbourg Cathedral's spire. To build upward is to reach inward. In an age obsessed with specialization, Villard's fused vision where the sacred and the technical danced together on every page whispers a radical idea that the highest creativity flourishes not in separation but in communion. His angels weren't decorating his engineering, they were essential to it, reminding us that the most enduring structures, whether of stone or soul, are always built on foundations unseen. The molten bronze bubbled like a sacred cauldron as medieval bell founders prepared their ritual, not merely crafting an instrument, but birthing a voice for the divine. Church bells weren't just metal cones meant to clang. Their creation was a sacrament from furnace to belfry. Founders fasted and prayed before pouring the searing alloy, often working during holy days when celestial alignments were thought to bless the metal. Recipes for bell bronze were guarded like relics, precise mixtures of copper and tin said to mimic the harmonic ratios of angelic choirs. The finest bells contained silver traces, not for practicality, but because the metal symbolized purity, a sonic shield against the demonic forces medieval Christians believed lurked in thunderclouds and crossroads. What's astonishing is how this spiritual pursuit drove metallurgical breakthroughs. To achieve perfect pitch, founders developed techniques like rotational casting, pivoting the mold as liquid bronze cooled to ensure even thickness. They tuned bells by shaving metal from inner surfaces, a process called voicing that required an ear as precise as any lute maker's. The great 12th century founder Canon Benedict even devised a system of tuning weights, hanging small lead strips inside bells to correct harmonics, anticipating modern acoustic engineering. These innovations didn't come from trial and error alone. They sprang from the conviction that a bell's tone should mirror the celestial music described by Boethius, where each planet's orbit produced a note in God's cosmic scale. The consecration of bells reveals just how deeply they were revered. Before installation, many underwent full baptismal rites, named after saints, anointed with chrism, even dressed in miniature vestments. Medieval records from Chartres describe bells being ordained like priests, with congregations gathering to witness their first resonant peal, as if hearing a spiritual birth. Some cities attributed supernatural powers to their bells. The Savoyard at Sacré-Cœur was believed to ward off plagues when rung during storms, its deep F-sharp pitch supposedly shattering airborne miasmas. Modern science confirms the brilliance behind these traditions. The harmonic profile of a well-tuned bell, its hum tone, strike note, and tierce, creates sound waves that propagate farther and clearer than random noise. Those medieval founders insisting their bells cleared the air weren't entirely wrong. Low-frequency tones can disrupt airborne particles, and the practice of synchronizing bells across a city. It created constructive interference patterns that amplified their reach, turning entire skylines into resonant chambers calling the faithful to prayer. Next time you hear an old church bell ringing the hour, listen closely. That sound carries 8 centuries of sacred science, a marriage of devotion and acoustics that shaped not just religious life, but the very soundscape of civilization. From the massive Maria Gloriosa of Erfurt Cathedral to the humble bells still marking Vespers in rural towns, these are not relics of superstition, but triumphs of a forgotten art where every vibration was a prayer cast in bronze. Stained glass windows did more than tell Bible stories. They transformed ordinary sunlight into something transcendent. Step into Chartres Cathedral at midday, and you'll see sapphire blues so intense they seem to glow from within, ruby reds that pulse like living embers. This wasn't just decorative art, it was sacred alchemy, where glassmakers manipulated light itself to create spaces shimmering with divine presence. The secret lay in their meticulous craftsmanship. Unlike modern glass, which gets its color from surface paints, medieval stained glass derived its hues from metal oxides fused into the molten silica. Cobalt for blue, gold for crimson, manganese for violet, each ingredient was chosen not just for vibrancy, but for how it interacted with sunlight streaming through at different angles. The result, windows that changed tone with the hour, turning the nave into a living kaleidoscope of devotion. What's astonishing is how these artisans anticipated principles of optics we'd only formalize centuries later. The thickness of the glass wasn't uniform. Craftsmen subtly varied it to diffuse harsh sunlight into a gentle radiance. They arranged colors deliberately too, placing cooler blues near the floor where light was dimmer, and warmer reds and yellows higher up to catch the sun's full intensity. At Bourges Cathedral, the Blue Virgin window uses layered glass to create a 3-dimensional effect, its azure tones appearing to float inches before the surface. Modern conservators using spectrophotometers have discovered something remarkable. The exact wavelengths filtered by these windows correspond to light frequencies that reduce eye strain and promote calm. Those medieval worshippers kneeling in the glow weren't just seeing pretty pictures, they were bathing in carefully engineered luminous therapy. The spiritual significance ran deeper than aesthetics. Glassmakers often worked in silence, treating their craft as a form of prayer. Recipes for certain colors were passed down like sacraments, with the formula for Chartres blue said to have been revealed in a vision. Some workshops timed their glass pouring to coincide with planetary alignments, believing celestial forces could influence the metal's molecular structure. And the windows themselves were arranged theologically. Old Testament scenes on the north side where light was cooler and more subdued, New Testament miracles on the south where warmth and brilliance prevailed. At Canterbury, the miracle windows depicting saintly healings were positioned so that sunlight would illuminate them precisely during morning mass, as if God himself were spotlighting the stories. Today, we've lost much of this sacred science. Despite advanced technology, attempts to reproduce the depth of medieval glass often fall short. The secret may lie in imperfections. Modern factories eliminate microscopic bubbles, and striations in antique glass scatter light in ways that create its signature glow. Or perhaps it's something less tangible. When conservators at St. Denis Cathedral painstakingly recreated a 12th century window using period tools and prayers, the new glass inexplicably developed the same luminous quality as the originals. It's a reminder that these windows weren't just made with sand and metal. They were born from a world where every beam of light was a thread connecting earth to heaven, and every color a word in a visual hymn older than time itself. When Filippo Brunelleschi demonstrated linear perspective by painting Florence's baptistery onto a mirror-polished panel, he wasn't just showing off artistic skill. He was unveiling what Renaissance thinkers believed to be God's own blueprint for creation. The moment viewers peered through his peephole device to see the painted image align perfectly with the real building, they weren't witnessing clever illusion. They were glimpsing the mathematical fabric of the universe made visible. Artists like Leon Battista Alberti soon codified these principles in treatises describing perspective as the veil through which we perceive divine order. Their carefully calculated vanishing points echoing medieval notions of God as the ultimate focal point where all lines of existence converge. This spiritual approach to spatial representation had seismic consequences beyond art. When architects like Bramante studied these perspective grids, they realized the same lines that created depth on canvas could guide stone blocks into soaring domes. The Florence Cathedral's iconic cupola, a marvel previously thought impossible, rose from construction plans drawn with perspectival precision, each curve plotted not just for stability, but to mirror celestial harmony. Manuscripts from the period show intricate overlays of perspective diagrams on architectural sketches, revealing how builders began seeing their blueprints as sacred geometry made tangible. Even the tools changed. Compasses and straightedges once used for symbolic mandalas were repurposed to draft palace facades, their angles now calculated to create optical illusions of grandeur that humbled viewers before both king and creator. What's often overlooked is how this fusion of faith and geometry birthed early engineering. The same gridded parchment that helped Masaccio paint the Trinity fresco also allowed engineers to visualize pulley systems for lifting cathedral stones. Leonardo da Vinci's exploded view diagrams of gear mechanisms owe their clarity to perspective techniques first developed to depict saints in heavenly space. A 15th century sketchbook from Siena shows watermill designs plotted with the same converging lines used for altar paintings, proof that Renaissance minds saw no divide between representing God's world and improving man's tools. The legacy of this holy geometry still structures our digital age. Every three-dimensional rendering in modern architecture software descends from those early perspective grids, their algorithms rooted in Alberti's Costruzione Legittima. Video game engines use virtual cameras whose parameters field of view, focal length were first defined by artists trying to paint paradise. Even the pixel itself carries faint echoes of medieval light theory, which held that all vision was divine illumination breaking into fragments. The next time you admire a CGI cityscape or navigate a virtual model, remember, you're seeing through a lens polished by Renaissance believers who thought mathematics was how God kept accounts and perspective his preferred ledger. Walking through a medieval monastery's herb garden, you wouldn't just see rows of plants, you'd be stepping into a living cathedral of healing. Each bed was laid out with sacred geometry, its spiraling paths and quadrant divisions mirroring the cosmos above. Rosemary wasn't just planted for its antiseptic properties. Its upright growth symbolized Christ's resurrection, and monks harvested it at dawn while reciting psalms, convinced these rituals amplified its potency. This was herbal science steeped in sacrament, where every leaf and root carried dual purpose, mending flesh while elevating spirit. The design of these gardens reveals how deeply spirituality shaped early pharmacology. At St. Gall Abbey in Switzerland, the 9th century plan shows medicinal beds arranged in perfect circles, echoing Dante's celestial spheres. Plants were grouped not just by growing conditions, but by their perceived spiritual affinities. Lungwort, with its Virgin Mary-associated speckled leaves, grew near heartsease, whose heart-shaped petals were thought to calm divine discontent. Even irrigation followed sacred patterns. Channels fed by rainwater were blessed as aqua divina, their flow timed to lunar phases when herbs were believed to absorb cosmic energies. What's astonishing is how this holistic approach drove agricultural breakthroughs. Monks developed early crop rotation to preserve soil holiness, noting that alternating legumes with medicinal flowers maintained both fertility and what they called the virtue of the earth. Their illustrated herbals, like the 12th century Physica by Hildegard of Bingen, documented grafting techniques and pollination methods alongside prayers for plant vitality. Modern chemists have since confirmed that many medieval harvesting rituals, like gathering digitalis foxglove, when dew still clung to its bells, actually maximized alkaloid concentrations. The legacy of this spiritual botany lingers in unexpected places. Renaissance hospitals like Santa Maria della Scala in Siena grew soul gardens where patients walked among fragrant herbs as part of therapy, centuries before aromatherapy entered medical textbooks. The Chelsea Physic Garden in London still preserves its original apothecary's wheel, a circular bed where plants were arranged by the humoral system: hot peppers for choleric temperaments near cooling violets for melancholics. Even the word officinalis in plant names like Salvia officinalis traces back to monastic officines, rooms where herbs were prepared with both mortar and prayer. Today, as modern medicine rediscovers the gut-brain axis and the placebo effect's power, these old practices seem less like superstition and more like premature insights. Clinical trials now confirm that St. John's wort, once harvested by monks on Midsummer's Eve as a talisman against dark spirits, contains hypericin, a compound affecting serotonin uptake. The calming effects of lavender, which medieval nuns tied to their rosaries to ward off spiritual unrest, are now explained by linalool's interaction with GABA receptors. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the medieval belief that healing required treating the invisible as diligently as the visible, a principle that resonates in today's growing focus on mental health and holistic care. Walking the recreated herb garden at the Cloisters Museum in New York, you can almost hear the whispered prayers of long-ago herbalists. Their legacy isn't just in the plants they cultivated, but in the radical idea that healing flourishes where science and reverence meet, where every remedy carries two prescriptions, one for the body and one for the soul. The astronomical clock of Prague doesn't merely mark the hours, it performs a mechanical miracle, a synchronized ballet of apostles, skeletons, and celestial bodies that has enchanted crowds for over 6 centuries. Every hour on the hour, death's bony hand tolls the bell, 12 apostles shuffle past tiny windows, and a golden rooster flaps its wings in a spectacle that's equal parts theater and theology. But beneath this mesmerizing display lies a far deeper story. The entire clock is a working model of medieval cosmology, its gears turning in precise harmony with what its creators believed was the music of the spheres. At first glance, the clock's face seems impossibly crowded, 3 concentric dials tracking everything from lunar phases to zodiac signs, yet every element serves a sacred purpose. The outermost ring, decorated with golden Schwabacher numerals, doesn't just show the time, it displays Italian hours, a system that divided daylight into 24 equal parts, reminding viewers that time itself was a divine gift measured by God's Son. The star map at the center doesn't merely chart constellations, it rotates to mirror the medieval belief that the heavens physically revolved around Earth, with each celestial sphere carrying angels and planets in its wake. Even the moon phase display, with its rotating black and gold sphere, was designed to reflect actual lunar luminosity, its dark half coated in crushed Bohemian marble to absorb light, while the gilded side shimmered like the moon itself. Then there's the hourly show, the moment when the clock truly comes alive. As the skeleton representing death tips his hourglass, the 12 apostles parade past windows flanked by 4 figures, a Turk shaking his head in disbelief, a miser clutching his purse, a vain man admiring his reflection, and finally Death himself striking the bell. This isn't random pageantry, it's a memento mori in motion, a reminder that time spares no one. The apostles' procession mirrors their journey to spread Christ's message, while the 4 flanking figures embody sins that distract from salvation. And that golden rooster, its crow, isn't just for effect, it symbolizes Peter's denial of Christ, a sonic prompt for repentance timed to the clock's most dramatic moment. What's most astonishing is how the clock's mechanics encode medieval theology. The planetary dial, often mistaken for mere decoration, actually calculates the positions of the sun and moon relative to Earth with astonishing accuracy. Its creator, Master Hanush, didn't just build a timekeeper, he engineered a miniature universe where mathematical precision proved divine order. The gears governing the zodiac ring don't just turn, they account for the precession of the equinoxes, a subtle wobble in Earth's axis that medieval astronomers interpreted as evidence of creation's delicate balance. Even the calendar wheel below, added in the 19th century but following Hanush's original designs, depicts saints' days and harvest cycles as interlocking cogs in God's grand design. Legends cling to this clock like ivy. One claims Hanush was blinded by Prague's council to prevent him from replicating his masterpiece elsewhere, a story that speaks to the awe it inspired. Another tells of the clock stopping during disasters, as if its gears were tuned to the pulse of history itself. During World War II, Nazi artillery damaged the mechanism, but local resistance fighters smuggled out its precious astronomical dial, hiding it until liberation. That the clock still runs today, its original 15th century gears meshing seamlessly with modern repairs, feels like a testament to the enduring power of its original vision, a world where time isn't just measured but sanctified. Standing before it now, watching the apostles emerge as the crowd gasps, you're witnessing more than medieval engineering. You're seeing a world, where every turning gear was a prayer, every chime a call to remember what lies beyond the ticking of seconds. In an age of digital clocks and atomic precision, the Prague astronomical clock remains a haunting reminder that time was never meant to be just numbers on a screen. It's the rhythm of something far greater, a melody written in brass and stone, still playing after all these centuries. The master builders of Chartres didn't just construct a cathedral, they conducted a conversation with the divine, stone by daring stone. When they hoisted those ribbed vaults higher than any in Christendom, they weren't merely showing off engineering prowess, they were reaching, quite literally, for heaven. Their secret, a profound belief that they weren't the architect's God was. The original blueprints, now lost to time, were said to have been delivered by angels in visions, their complex geometries decoded by monks who saw numbers as sacred keys to creation. This wasn't humility, it was liberation. Freed from the weight of personal ego, these builders took risks that would make modern engineers blanch. They mixed powdered stained glass into mortar, trusting the shimmering bond would hold. They cantilevered flying buttresses at impossible angles, convinced celestial forces would steady them. And when the rains came and the walls groaned, they didn't panic, they prayed, then adjusted the pitch of their arches by fractions of a degree, guided by what they called the hand of the unseen craftsman. This spiritual audacity birthed techniques we still marvel at today. Take the plate tracery in Chartres windows, delicate stone frameworks thinner than a man's arm, supporting vast expanses of glass. Modern simulations show they shouldn't withstand high winds, yet 8 centuries later, they stand unbroken. Why? Because medieval masons didn't just calculate load-bearing. They seasoned their limestone in prayer for years before carving, believing time and devotion strengthened the stone's very essence. Their experimental mortar recipes included egg whites and goat's blood, not as primitive additives, but as sacred offerings meant to bind earthly materials with heavenly resilience. Even their scaffolding was theological. Temporary wooden towers called flying foxes were dismantled not with hammers but with hymns, as if the act of construction required liturgical rhythm. The legacy of this sacred daring echoes in modern architecture, though we've often forgotten its roots. When Santiago Calatrava designs a bridge that seems to defy physics, or Zaha Hadid sketches a building that flows like liquid, they're channeling the same spirit that once moved medieval builders. The conviction that true innovation requires both precision and surrender. The difference: today's architects sign their masterpieces, while the masons of Chartres left only a labyrinth in the nave floor, a silent signature saying the work was never theirs alone. Perhaps that's the most enduring lesson. When you build as if the divine is your collaborator, you don't just push boundaries, you dissolve them. The next time you stand beneath a soaring arch or a gravity-defying cantilever, remember, it might just be the ghost of a medieval builder whispering, "Go higher." The sky isn't the limit, it's the invitation. The massive trebuchet creaked as its counterweight swung, hurling a stone projectile with terrifying precision. Yet to the medieval mind, this wasn't just a weapon, it was an instrument of divine will. Siege engines like these often bore names like God's own sling or St. Michael's hammer, their very construction blessed by priests who anointed their timbers with holy oil. The trebuchet's throwing arm, arcing like a celestial pendulum, was seen as an extension of God's hand, delivering righteous judgment upon fortress walls. Even the mathematics of their design carried spiritual weight. Engineers calculated trajectories using ratios they believed mirrored the harmony of the spheres, adjusting counterweights until the machine's motion felt just, as if tuning a sacred instrument. Consider the Warwolf, the colossal trebuchet built by King Edward I during the siege of Stirling Castle. Chroniclers didn't just describe its destructive power, they marveled at its perfect proportions, comparing its balance to the scales of Archangel Michael. Its projectiles, carefully rounded like prayer beads, were sometimes inscribed with psalms, transforming stone into sacred shrapnel. The machine's very operation became ritual. Master gunners would fast before launching the first shot, and engineers timed volleys to coincide with liturgical hours, as if the bombardment itself were a form of prayer. This spiritual framing extended to other siege technologies. Battering rams were often capped with iron in the shape of lambs' heads, symbolizing Christ as the Lamb of God breaking down gates of sin. Catapults bore painted images of the Virgin Mary, their torsion springs wrapped in cloth from saintly relics. Even the trenches dug beneath castle walls, a tactic called mining, were sometimes blessed as the path of the righteous, their tunnels echoing with chants as sappers worked. What's most striking is how this mindset influenced military strategy. Commanders would delay assaults to avoid major feast days, believing celestial favor waxed and waned with the church calendar. The chronicles of the Siege of Jerusalem describe crusaders constructing siege towers not just as platforms, but as makeshift chapels. Their upper levels housing altars where priests celebrated Mass as the structure inched toward the walls. To modern eyes, this blending of piety and violence seems paradoxical, but to medieval warriors there was no contradiction. War itself was a sacrament, and every mangonel's launch, a hymn written in stone and fire. The legacy of this sacred warfare lingers in unexpected places. Modern military terms like salvo, from salvation, and ordnance, related to ordination, carry faint echoes of this era. Even the concept of just war finds roots in those trebuchet crews who believed their machines could only strike true if God willed it. In an age where technology often feels detached from morality, these medieval engines whisper an unsettling question. When we design tools of immense power, do we still pause to ask what or whom they truly serve? The answer might lie not in the machinery itself, but in the hands and hearts that guide it. The dusty roads winding toward Santiago de Compostela pulsed with more than pilgrim footsteps. They throbbed with the exchange of ideas that would reshape a continent. Along these sacred routes, stonemasons from Burgundy shared vaulting techniques with German builders over campfires. Italian glassmakers bartered secrets for stained pigments with French artisans in roadside taverns. Even the humble scallop shell symbol of the Camino became a medieval flash drive, its grooves inspiring hydraulic engineers who noticed how water channeled through its ridges. This wasn't just travel, it was the world's first crowdsourced knowledge network, where every wandering soul carried fragments of innovation like sacred relics in their packs. Take the flying buttress, that iconic Gothic innovation allowing cathedrals to soar heavenward. Its design didn't emerge fully formed in Paris. It evolved through 1,000 conversations along the pilgrimage roads. Masons from the Loire Valley, who'd experimented with half-arches to support their local churches, swapped sketches with Catalan builders at the monastery hostel in Roncesvalles. By the time these ideas reached Leon and Burgos, they'd merged with Moorish weight distribution principles carried north by Andalusian stonecutters. The result? A structural revolution that literally elevated architecture, all because devout travelers traded knowledge as fervently as they traded prayers. The transfer wasn't limited to stone and mortar. In the scriptoria of Cluny and Conques, monks compiling illuminated guidebooks for pilgrims accidentally created medieval wikis pages crammed with architectural diagrams, herbal remedies, and even mechanical sketches alongside saintly biographies. One 12th century manuscript from Moissac shows precise instructions for constructing watermills, sandwiched between prayers to St. James. These books traveled in saddlebags from Scotland to Sicily, their margins filling with annotations in 12 languages as each reader added local innovations. Commerce followed devotion, sparking unexpected cross-pollination. Basque ironworkers near Pamplona, inspired by the delicate filigree on reliquaries carried by German pilgrims, adapted those metalworking techniques to improve plowshares, boosting agricultural yields across Navarre. Flemish wool merchants walking the Camino to atone for usury brought back Spanish tile-making methods that later revolutionized northern European drainage systems. Even culinary technology spread along these routes. The first recorded use of hops in beer outside Bavaria appears in a tavern ledger along the French Way, scribbled beside a pilgrim's IOU. The roads themselves became living laboratories. Bridges like Puente la Reine, built specifically for pilgrims, showcased engineering breakthroughs. their arches designed by consortiums of international masons who'd met on earlier journeys. Hostel hospitals developed proto-sanitation systems to handle waves of travelers, with rainwater catchment and herb gardens that became models for municipal planning. At Los Medulas, former Roman gold mines turned pilgrimage stops. Monks repurposed ancient hydraulic mining techniques to create Europe's earliest documented water-powered bellows for forges. What made this knowledge exchange so potent was its egalitarian nature. In an age when most peasants never traveled beyond their village, the Camino flattened hierarchies. A nobleman from Aquitaine might find himself sharing a meal with a Saxon wheelwright, discussing axle improvements over stale bread. Illiterate farmers carried seeds of new crops wrapped in prayer scrolls, while Jewish physicians often barred from universities shared medical advances with clerics at wayside shrines. The roads didn't just connect places, they connected minds that would never have met otherwise. The legacy of this spiritual network still whispers in unexpected places. Next time you admire a Gothic cathedral's ribbed vault, remember it might trace its ancestry to a chance encounter between a Norman architect and a Persian mathematician on the road to Santiago. That windmill turning lazily in a Dutch landscape, its gear system could owe debts to a conversation between a Hungarian blacksmith and a Breton monk outside Leon. Even the concept of guidebooks, those Camino manuscripts, were the lonely planets of their day, shows how pilgrimage didn't just move people toward faith. It moved humanity toward the future, one dusty step at a time. Dante's Divine Comedy might seem like pure poetry, but hidden within its verses lay blueprints that would inspire thinkers for centuries. When he described the heavens as concentric spheres turning in perfect harmony, he wasn't just crafting metaphors, he was sketching a cosmic model so compelling that astronomers like Giovanni da Lancino later adapted it into their star charts. The comedy's vision of God as a blinding point of light, radiating infinite concentric circles, didn't just shape medieval art, it anticipated the very geometry Renaissance engineers would use to design lenses and later telescopes. Even Dante's eerie depiction of Satan's frozen wings, beating futilely in the icy depths of Cocytus, mirrored the mechanical paradoxes that would fascinate early inventors: motion without progress, energy without escape. Consider his description of the primum mobile, the outermost sphere that moves all creation with divine love. While theologians debated its spiritual meaning, clockmakers in Padua and Nuremberg saw something else: a celestial gear train. The elaborate astronomical clocks that began appearing in cathedrals within decades of the comedy's spread didn't just tell time. They physically replicated Dante's layered cosmos, their brass orbits spinning in synchronized perfection. The famed Astrarium of Giovanni da Dondi, completed in 1364, didn't just display planetary positions, it brought the poet's vision into 3 dimensions, with dials for each heavenly sphere and a central axis representing the divine axis mundi. Then there's the light, Dante's portrayal of paradise as an ever-brightening cascade of luminescence, where souls glow brighter the closer they near God's radiance, didn't just inspire frescoes, it influenced the science of optics. Medieval glassmakers studying the comedy's descriptions of refracted glory in the sphere of Jupiter began experimenting with prismatic effects in stained glass, leading to breakthroughs in lens grinding. The poet's account of light bending around the cross in the sphere of Mars directly parallels later diagrams by scholars like Whitelow, whose studies on refraction laid groundwork for Renaissance perspective theory. Perhaps most astonishing is how Dante's hellscape anticipated engineering challenges. His vivid account of the giants Nimrod and Antaeus, shackled in pits with bodies proportioned to their sins, mirrors the structural calculations Gothic architects used for load-bearing sculptures. The shifting, sliding sinners of the fraudulent circle, forever slipping on viscous pitch, read like a medieval thought experiment on friction coefficients. Even the comedy's infamous contrapasso, where punishments mirror crimes, found eerie echoes in early automata, like those Nuremberg craftsmen built where mechanical sinners reenacted their failings in clockwork tableaus. By the time Galileo lectured on Dante's infernal geography at the Florentine Academy, the poet's imaginative worlds had already blurred the line between spiritual vision and technical innovation. The comedy's greatest legacy isn't just its theology or its art, it's the proof that sometimes to build the future, you first have to dream it in verse. And in those dreams, the sacred and the mechanical weren't rivals. They were partners dancing to the same celestial rhythm. High above the altar of Winchester Cathedral, an unseen mechanism whirred to life as dawn light filtered through stained glass. Pipes taller than a man began to resonate with tones so deep they vibrated in the chest, not from any human breath, but from a hydraulic system of precisely weighted bellows and valves. This was the medieval organ at its most magnificent, a machine that didn't just accompany hymns, but became a voice for the divine itself. What began as simple panpipes evolved into hydraulic marvels under monastic workshops, where monks calculated pipe length using sacred geometry, believing certain ratios produced tones that aligned with celestial harmonies. The organ at Halberstadt Cathedral, built in 1361, required 20 bellows operated by 10 men. Its lowest pipe, made of hammered lead, emitted a note so profound it was said to mimic the voice of God speaking to Moses. But organs were just the beginning. In the secluded gardens of Burgundian monasteries, mechanical nightingales perched in gilded cages, their brass throats producing trills indistinguishable from living birds. These weren't toys, they were devotional aids designed to remind monks that even creation's smallest creatures praised their maker. The intricate mechanisms behind them, using adjustable air chambers and rotating cams to vary pitch and rhythm, became early prototypes for programmable music. A surviving 14th century example from Clairvaux Abbey reveals astonishing sophistication. Tiny screws adjust the bird's song to match seasonal liturgical modes, with Lenten settings more somber than Easter's jubilant flourishes. The true masterpieces, though, were the self-playing carillons that crowned cathedral towers. At St. Rumbold's in Mechelen, a drum studded with pegs, like a giant music box, plucked hundreds of bells in precise sequences. Clockmakers collaborated with composers to encode sacred melodies into these peg patterns, creating the earliest forms of musical code. Some towers took this further. The Strasbourg Cathedral's astronomical clock included a mechanical rooster that crowed at dawn, triggering a cascade of automated psaltery strings and flute pipes to greet the day with what contemporary chronicles called the Song of Creation Reborn. What's often overlooked is how these inventions blurred the line between art and engineering. The same monastic workshops that painstakingly copied Gregorian chants also produced parchment rolls with punched holes, early punch cards that guided pipe organs through complex fugues. These cylinder books allowed a single musician to perform polyphonic music that normally required 4 singers, anticipating player piano roles by 6 centuries. Even the notation systems reflected this fusion. Manuscripts from Canterbury show musical staves annotated with tiny gear diagrams, indicating when certain mechanisms should engage. The legacy of these sacred sound machines hums quietly in modern technology. Player pianos, synthesizers, even MIDI sequencing all trace conceptual roots to those medieval monks who believed perfect praise required both devotion and innovation. Next time you hear an electronic keyboard replicate a choir or a smart device chime the hour, remember, you're hearing echoes of an age when music wasn't just made, but engineered as an act of faith, where every note was a bridge between the workshop and the heavens. The Knights Templar didn't just guard pilgrim routes, they engineered them. Beneath their white mantles emblazoned with red crosses beat the hearts of medieval polymaths, men who transformed warfare, finance, and even shipbuilding through a unique fusion of devotion and ingenuity. Take their famed network of preceptories across Europe. These weren't mere fortresses, but nodes in an unprecedented financial system. Pilgrims could deposit funds at a Templar house in Paris and withdraw the equivalent in Jerusalem using encrypted letters of credit, a system so advanced it functioned like a 13th century blockchain. Their vaults, protected by labyrinthine architecture and complex locking mechanisms, became the safest banks of the age, complete with double-entry bookkeeping adapted from Islamic traders they'd encountered in the Holy Land. But their innovations extended far beyond economics. Templar architects pioneered fortified churches with rounded naves, not just for aesthetics, but to deflect projectiles during sieges. Their nautical breakthroughs were even more astonishing. At their secretive shipyards in La Rochelle, they developed deep-hulled cogs with sternpost rudders centuries before these became standard, allowing them to transport horses and siege engines across the Mediterranean. Some historians believe their sailors may have used early magnetic compasses, possibly learned from Chinese technology via Silk Road contacts. Even their agricultural estates revolutionized food production, with experimental crop rotations and water mills arranged in geometric patterns that maximized efficiency, layouts later copied by Cistercian monasteries. The true mystery lies in how abruptly this knowledge vanished. When Philip Roman IV of France moved to destroy the order in 1307, Templar archives were systematically burned or hidden. Rumors persist of surviving manuscripts containing everything from advanced mathematics to alchemical formulas, smuggled out in the dead of night. A handful of their innovations resurfaced generations later. The ribbed vaulting in Gothic cathedrals bears striking similarities to Templar chapel designs, while Renaissance banking systems eerily mirrored their financial models. Even Christopher Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, was built using hull techniques first documented in Templar-controlled ports. What made these warrior monks such prolific innovators? Perhaps it was their unique position at the crossroads of cultures, absorbing ideas from Byzantine engineers, Arab mathematicians, and Jewish scholars. Or maybe it was their singular focus viewing every advancement, whether in masonry or maritime navigation, as another tool to serve God's will. Their legacy whispers through history not in grand declarations, but in the silent persistence of their influence, the way a particular arch in a Scottish chapel echoes their signature style, or how modern Swiss banking laws still bear traces of their financial protocols. The Templars remind us that sometimes the most revolutionary technologies aren't just about what's built, but about who's willing to see the divine potential in every stone, every coin, every wave-crossing vessel. As we've seen, the medieval world didn't separate technology from spirituality. It saw them as two languages describing the same divine reality. From clockwork monks to cosmic cathedrals, these echoes of the invisible remind us that innovation often springs from deepest yearning, not just cold calculation. Perhaps our modern tech, for all its power, could learn from this holistic vision. If this journey through spiritual machines has sparked your curiosity, share your thoughts below. What medieval marvel most amazed you? And don't forget to subscribe for more explorations where history's hidden connections come to light. There's something humbling about realizing how much we've forgotten. Today's engineers build algorithms to predict our desires, while medieval artisans crafted automata to embody prayer. We design apps to streamline productivity. They designed labyrinths to slow the soul. The difference isn't just in tools, but in purpose. Where we see efficiency, they saw communion. That's not to romanticize the past. Medieval life was brutal, short, and often dark. Yet in their striving, they left us a challenge. Can technology uplift without diminishing? Can it connect without isolating? Think of the Prague astronomical clock, still marking time after 6 centuries. Its gears don't just count minutes, they dance with apostles and angels, turning hours into homilies. Compare that to our smartwatches, buzzing with notifications but silent on meaning. Or consider Hildegard of Bingen, composing music based on celestial harmonies while pioneering herbal medicine, a reminder that healing and beauty once shared the same root. Even their failures instruct us. When Gothic vaults collapsed, builders didn't just adjust calculations. They fasted and prayed, seeking flaws in their hearts as well as their blueprints. This isn't about nostalgia, it's about recovering a lost way of seeing. Modern science gives us staggering power, but medieval thinkers understood something we've neglected. That awe is its own kind of intelligence. When they studied the stars, it wasn't just to chart them, but to join their song. When they engineered water wheels, they saw divine energy made tangible. We've gained precision, but at what cost? Our satellites map every inch of the globe, yet how often do we still look up in wonder? The lesson isn't to abandon progress, but to reimagine its soul. What if our AI could cultivate wisdom, not just data? What if our cities mirrored ecosystems, not just spreadsheets? The Middle Ages show us that the greatest innovations emerge when we bridge the measurable and the mystical, when gears turn prayers into motion and stone soars skyward on wings of faith. Their legacy whispers that technology at its best doesn't just solve problems, it sings. So as you swipe and click through your day, spare a thought for those who built cathedrals to house light and clocks to chime eternity. Their world was smaller, but their vision was vast. And if their stories have stirred something in you, that itch to create, to seek, to marvel, then perhaps their greatest invention wasn't any machine, but the enduring belief that human hands, guided by something greater, can shape the impossible. The next chapter of innovation is yours to write.